excited because today is Earth Day, and that is super relevant because of the nature of the work that you do. Oh, and it's such a perfect shirt. I love it. So I want to give a little bit of background here. Both you and I went to Rochester Institute of Technology and graduated from the photography program. And it's pretty cool to see some other R.I.T alumni go on to do amazing things like what you're doing. And for those who don't know, you are an environmental photojournalist, and you recently completed your role in the American Conservation Experience, and you're now going on to work for WORC, which you can tell us more about that in a little bit. But yeah, super fitting today to be talking to you about the environment and nonprofits that you've worked with. And I've seen all your posts on social media, and it looks really cool, the work you've been doing. So I'm so excited to get to hear more about the behind the scenes of what went into making those photos and really what it is that you do. I think there are probably a lot of people out there who would be interested in doing the type of work that you do, but have no idea how to even begin doing that type of photography. So I would love to start with you telling us a little bit more about what you do and kind of what it means to be an environmentalist photojournalist like you, and just kind of give us a little bit more into your world.
Sure. So the role I had with the American Conservation Experience started as a 3-month internship, and I went into it pretty much knowing nothing about conservation corps, which primarily what they do is trail building, invasive species removal, that kind of work. But we also had another section of that company, aside from the core, was a professionals in conservation. It's a different core. So there was kind of the crews that did the trail work, and then there was corps that were more science and research based. So anytime if you saw images of people doing more science stuff, so a lot of like fish monitoring or bird surveys, working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, working with NPS, that was more on the professionals in conservation, who are also people just coming out of college, working towards becoming professionals in the conservation world. So basically, when I started, they had only had one other photojournalist before me. She, I think, was on for about 6 months, and they had no video work. Their Instagram was pretty much non-existent at that point. So they brought me on to kind of vamp all of that up. And I definitely know that like having video work was key and me getting hired with them. And yeah, they kind of just gave me the reins and let me do what I wanted with it, which is awesome. I mean, very hands-off. And then the same way, it was a little bit challenging because there wasn't really like a mentorship aspect of the internship. It was kind of just like, go out there and produce work and like kind of see what you see, and then come back and produce stories, and then also produce videos and social media content.
Wow, yeah. So I didn't realize that you were able to actually play a role in developing your role and kind of what that means, and maybe how they can use it in a bigger way. So do you see more of this now, where more nonprofits are bringing on photojournalists to kind of document and tell the stories? Is that something that you see kind of happening more?
I'd like to think so, yeah. I mean, I was the first with that particular nonprofit, and it's very similar to the situation I'm coming into now. They have one other creative content producer, but it's definitely more of a developed position. They have specific things, but they've also made it very clear to me that there's plenty of room to incorporate my own style and my own ideas for projects. So I think working with nonprofits is really cool in that way, because it's not like working for a newspaper where you're working with a group of people who are all experts in media. You're the expert in the media. And in some cases, you might be fresh out of college and you're going to be the expert for your whole organization in media, which is what happened to me with the American Conservation Experience. So it did give me a lot of leeway to start video series. I mean, we had like 4 videos. We have 4 video series now that we didn't have when I started, which was just cool. I mean, and it gave me a lot of leeway when the more I got out into the field, the more I would meet people who work for the National Park Service now that were an ACE Corps member 5 years ago. So then it was like, okay, let's start a series where we just interview people who are already having these careers in the field that started with us in ACE. And that was really awesome because I've always wanted to work with the Park Service since I was a kid. So that just gave me a lot of room to even create work outside of the organization. Technically, you know, as somebody who hasn't been with us for 5 years, but we want to promote that kind of thing. So it worked. But yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So I want to kind of back up a little bit and hear more about how you got into photography, because it kind of piqued my interest that you were saying, you know, even, you know, as a kid, you've been dreaming of working with the Park Service. Is this something that you always envisioned would be through the portal of photography, or did that develop later on?
That developed later on. Yeah, I think I definitely want to be like a park ranger of sorts. But I think I just, on a trip out west when I was like 8, my dad had a professional camera on hand. And I think there was some sort of connection between being there, seeing him create images, being exposed to the National Park Service more thoroughly than I had been on the East Coast. You know, I had been to Acadia as a kid. So all those little experiences, I think, added up to definitely wanting to work with like public lands and working in the Park Service. I just don't think I really put together like what my skill set would end up being. And yeah, I started shooting photos when I was probably about 14, like early high school, late middle school, and never really thought about it until like came college time. And my sister was also an R.I.T grad, so she had some other friends that were in the photo program that raved about it, and photojournalism just struck a chord because it seemed like this outlet where I could get involved in a lot of different things. I think my attention span is very good for photojournalism because you can have your hands on a lot of pots, and you don't have to necessarily you have your skill set, which is photography, but you can go into a lot of different avenues with nonprofits and the variety of nonprofits that you can work with. Also, in college, I worked with the Finger Lakes Regional Burn Association, working with burn survivors. It was a nonprofit. So I worked with a birding group. So it's a great way to have like a broad range of experiences.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that as we get deeper into our careers, we start to realize how we can merge some of our passions. You know, I can do photography and also combine my love of nature and conservation. You know, that's so cool. And I think it sometimes takes us a little bit to connect the dots there and be like, oh, food and photography, they go together, you know, things like that. Like, oh, I can actually combine these things in my career. So that's really cool that you were able to get to that point where you're really fulfilling multiple passions there. So I want to hear more specifically about how you feel storytelling through photojournalism impacts nonprofits and what role that's serving for them.
Sure. So with ACE, a lot of it was recruitment based. And what the feedback I got a lot from volunteers, so ACE is a volunteer based organization. We have a large number of staff members, but most of the work gets done through volunteering. And the feedback that I got from Corps members most often was that they really enjoyed the videos because it gave them like this real vision of like what they'd be going through and hearing real people talk about their real experiences. I think that's just really key and like encouraging people because, you know, obviously you show the best parts regardless, especially when so it's interesting, I guess, being a photojournalist for a nonprofit when the work takes kind of a promotional vibe, for lack of a better word. So working with nonprofits to tell their story without being an ad, and then while also maybe, you know, like you're still encouraging something to happen, right? But I guess that's kind of the goal with most photojournalism, is that you're trying to encourage an outcome. And with the organization I'm working with now, it's a little bit, it's a two parts. It's part of it is a nonprofit and the other part is not. So some of the work, it's all still photojournalistic in the way that it's produced and everything, but a lot of it is actually the stories we're producing are going to be helping support campaigns that will help protect people against oil and gas, the impacts of oil and gas industry in the West, and as well as the impacts of factory farming in the West, and how that impacts small rural farms. So I guess to answer your question, it's like, I guess it's kind of multifaceted. On one hand, it was recruitment based, but it was also a lot of it's educational too. We did a lot of work with ACE where people didn't totally understand why we were doing what we were doing. And so that's where I came in to kind of bridge that gap between the experts in the field and the public, and explain like why we do what we do.
Yeah, very cool. So I just want to fill our viewers in on kind of where your next chapter has led you to. And so you are now in Montana. You recently moved there, and you're working for an organization called the Western Organization of Resources. What is it? Western Organization of Resources Council, right? WORC. I want to make sure I got that right. I wrote it down. I was like, oh, okay. And so you are now a content creator for this organization, correct? And I know you kind of mentioned a little bit about the projects you're doing there, but I want to hear you tell us a little bit more about, you know, why you're excited for this new role and what you're going to be doing for them, and kind of maybe what your hopes are for being in this new role.
Sure. Yeah, so my experience with ACE, with the American Conservation Experience, was really like the best thing for like your early 20s, because they just sent me traveling all over the place. And I loved the work that I was creating, but it was a little bit, like, I guess in school we did so many projects where it's like, you want to go home with your subject. Like, you want to see what their home life is like. You want to see where they go to work. And with ACE, it was kind of like, okay, well, they work 8 days at a time and then they have 6 days off. So they're in the field for 8 days, and their home is camp and their work is in the field. So I felt like I was kind of lacking some intimacy, and I was also kind of always working with the same demographic, which is 18 to 25-year-olds, which is super fun. But they definitely kind of got to a point where it's like, oh, I want to work in a community. I want to work in like small communities again. But I don't necessarily right now want to work for like a small town newspaper. So how do I get back to kind of my roots, which is I grew up in rural upstate New York and a farming community. So kind of trying to reconnect back to that and tell stories that are a little bit closer to home. But my senior capstone project at R.I.T was about a natural gas pipeline that was slated to go through my hometown. And the projects followed different perspectives on how people felt about that natural gas pipeline, because it's a controversial issue. So I'm super excited, because that's always been an interest of mine, and definitely hits close to home, because the New York State watershed's right next to where I grew up, and they wanted to put this pipeline through that would have a lot of impacts on the waterways and the watershed there. And so when this came up, it just seemed a little bit too good to be true. It kind of hit all the points of supporting small rural farmers, and how they're kind of trying to combat against like climate change, how they're combating against factory farms, and then also showing how people are being impacted by oil and gas industry in the West. So I'm also excited because it's a part of the country I've never lived in before, and getting to travel and see the Northwest, as opposed to, I mean, ACE, I traveled everywhere, but I didn't get to spend any prolonged periods of time in the northwestern states. So.
Yeah, Montana is absolutely beautiful. I'm sure you're gonna love spending some time there for an extended period of time. You're not gonna get bored there. So I want to, is there any specific project photos or videos that stand out in your head as having a really big impact that you can tell us about?
Really big impact. Yeah, it's hard to say. It's a hard question, because like I think I had my own personal favorites that I think do, and then versus like what actually, when you look at like raw data online of like what had the most reach and what had the most impact. So I guess I can talk about both, if that's cool.
Yeah.
Sweet. So we did a project with ACE that was about forest thinning, and that project needed funding from the citizens. The citizens needed to back it. The citizens of Flagstaff needed to back this project because their tax money was going towards this project, and we were also trying to get a grant. So it was great because they had the money for the first year, so I was able to go in and interview the Forest Service, interview a bunch of our members and our crew leaders, and then go and just like photograph people felling these ponderosas. And the whole purpose of it is to prevent wildfires from becoming catastrophic in the Flagstaff, the Dry Lake Hills watershed. So it was cool because the project actually has been going for 4 years now, and we use the video every year to try and just like gain support for the project, as well as continue to be able to get grants, just so we can say, hey, look, this is how the positive impact that it had on our members. This is how it's positively impacting the Coconino National Forest around Flagstaff. So that probably, as far as like impact, like that's something where we had a goal. We knew how this media could support that goal, and then I went and executed it. So that probably had the most impact as far as like that company goes. For me personally, we have a program that is called the Phoenix Field School. It's for youth who are interested in a career in conservation and might not have like all the means to, get themselves started. So we support them, and they get to go to classes 4 days, or classes are on Monday, and then they go into the field for the last 3 days. And so I did a video on one of our members who had a particularly incredible story. And that I think I had the most people who had like individual core members who came up to me who said that her story helped encourage them to go ahead and take the plunge and come out. And because it's a big leap to like, move across the country, and you're volunteering, you're not making much, you make a stipend, it's a tough, and you're dedicating like 3 to 6 months of your life to this cause. So it's nice to know for me that had a good impact on them, that they felt encouraged after seeing what I made.
Wow, yeah, that's really cool. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit more in depth. Again, like not being from a photojournalist background at all, it's like we don't fully realize what all, you're doing and what goes into that. And so it's really cool to hear like some of the specific projects and how that impacts the people around you. Just really inspirational. And that's why I'm doing these talks, is because I think that just by hearing each other's stories, we can get really inspired. So in case anybody watching this is feeling inspired to look more into photojournalism and kind of start heading down that path, do you have any advice or resources you would recommend for people that are aspiring photojournalists or want to get more into working with nonprofits?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the fact that I had a minor in environmental studies helped me a lot, especially in landing my job with ACE, and then all of my experience with ACE. I mean, and I took that internship with ACE, and I remember like I hadn't really looked at any of their media. I was just so excited that I had it, because I mean, I was told so many times that I wasn't going to be able to find a job in both environmentalism and conservation, or in photojournalism. So, the first, it wasn't the first. I actually had another totally unpaid internship that I was offered that I didn't take because there was something about Flagstaff, Arizona that I just really wanted to go. But yeah, it was kind of scary. So I think the biggest thing with that was just like having some faith in myself that I could create something. And not necessarily, I mean, I think I had to let go of a lot of like kind of what I thought was expected out of a career in photojournalism because, if I see my friends and like colleagues like getting published in the New York Times and all these big names. And it's like, oh, well, I mean, every once in a while somebody picks up something that I did for a nonprofit and that's cool and exciting. But I think you have to kind of shift what your definition of success looks like in a lot of ways. Because I was looking and they had 300 Instagram followers and I'm like, well, I'm like definitely not like, I'm not going to make a name for myself doing this. But you have the power to create something something that's worth striving for. Because I don't think ACE had any like professional photographers with degrees applying for that internship when they posted it. I don't know, but had never heard of ACE. So I think the advice I would give is, if you find a nonprofit and they're looking for media, and it sounds like something you can create something out of. And when I took that internship, I was like, 3 months, I don't think I'm going to have, I think I'll be content after 3 months with just photographing trail work. And then I came to learn all the different things that they did and all the ways that I could create content for them. So I ended up staying for 3.5 years instead of 3 months. So just give it the room. Like if you see it, I would just jump on it and create it yourself.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think that you are very brave and it does take a lot of bravery to pursue your dreams, and especially when there is no promise of guaranteed salary or the recognition that you would hope to have, and some of the career paths, especially in the arts, that is what we're up against, and it does take a lot of bravery to keep going with it. And I think that you're a good example of, you can make it happen, and what really matters is you are doing what you're passionate about, and I'm sure that is filling you up in many ways. So I do want to kind of hear just in general, what is being a photographer to you? Like, what is that, or a photojournalist, what does that mean to you?
Sure. It's a good question.
I know, hard one. Full of hard questions.
I was like kind of thinking recently, I don't know if this like totally answers your question, but a lot of like when I create something, it's like a reaction to something else. So I think for me, being a photojournalist is like using photography to respond to an issue or respond to somebody's story, and then create something that's hopefully going to help them at some point, help their cause or help them, if they're depending on, what the story is. I think kind of to keep it short, being a photographer for me is the way I can respond in a way that hopefully will be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. We're getting close to being out of time here. I think one of the really cool thing that I'm starting to see through these talks and talking to you guys out there in the industry who are really, following your passions and making it a reality even when it's not easy, is it's just proving how powerful photography can be and how it can be used in different ways to impact people and impact the world. And a lot of times people hear photography and they just think, oh, you're taking pretty pictures or whatever, but it's so much more than that. And especially in your career, where I'm sure you've experienced a lot and seen a lot of maybe some difficult situations and things that were hard to witness, but you really made it about the selfless act of contributing to it in a way that is really helpful and hopefully going to make some change and have a difference. And so I think that's really cool. Thank you so much for what you're doing, and thank you so much for joining us today and Desert Passion. Super excited that you were able to spend some time with us today. I hope you enjoy Montana and your new job out there. And I think I saw you got a new puppy recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to see the puppy. Oh my God, so cute. Oh, how old is he?
2 months.
2 months. And what's his name?
Name is Kip.
Kip. Oh, well, I'm glad you have some company out there in Montana, and
Yeah, he's
I'm
a lifesaver.
Sure he's gonna keep you busy too.
Definitely.
All right. Well, thank you, Jessica. It was great talking to you.